for all of the financial resources of the city over the next budget year, when the council appropriates the funds for that budget, as well as a 5-year financial plan, looking forward given various assumptions. It is an operations guide that restates all of the operations of the city, gives you their performance measures, their goals and objectives, and it is a public communication device. Everything that is in the budget document is public information. It is available on the city's website. Anyone who is watching which would like a copy of the budget document will be glad to give it to you if you'll call the finance department. What you're being presented here is the city manager's proposed budget, which is similar to the executive budget that is presented by the president to the Congress or by the governor to the state legislature. So you are the governing body that is receiving this city manager's proposed budget. The budget process is really a year-round process that started back in September with Finance Committee budget discussions on how you wanted the budget process to run. We had a council budget study session in November and again a capital budget study session in February. We had the mid-year budget review later on in February where you got a lot of the financial information we're going to talk about today as to where we project the finances of the city will be at the end of this fiscal year. We are now kind of in the middle of the end, if you will, of the budget process, where the first of the 3 study sessions will be presenting the city manager's proposed budget to you. The first public budget hearing will be at next council meeting on next Tuesday. So certainly the public is invited to come there to receive summarized information on the budget and to give any input that you, the public, might want to give to the council as they are considering the budget for final adoption on June the 14th. I heard some discussions as we were entering the room about, just kind of the size of the budget documents and how intimidating it can be. And again, everything is in there. But if you understand the layout of the documents, you will know that it's not so intimidating to find what you're looking for. Basically, the layout of the documents is that the most summarized information is at the front, and as you go forward toward the back, you get more and more detailed information. But there are 2 sections that I would draw the council's attention to and the public's attention to that you can get really all of the information that you need about the proposed budget. The first is in the city manager's letter of transmittal. It's about a 20-page document, but it's really not that long because there's a lot of pictures and stuff in there. But I would really recommend that you read that city manager's letter. It talks about kind of where we are, where we think we're going. And I would draw your attention to the financial summary pages, which gives summarized information for all of the city's 27 various funds. It gives highlights for this budget, gives all of the revenues and expenditures for all of those individual funds. And again, just by reading those sections, you can get really all of the information that you need for the budget documents. Then as you go forward after page 118 is that detailed information on all of the city's operations. So for example, if you want to know detailed information about the water fund, there's information about the water fund in there with the various divisions and cost centers that are in the water enterprise fund, it's in there. If you're interested in animal welfare, it's in there. So again, it's in those detailed pages. You don't have to read the whole thing, but the organization charts and all that you might want to see is in there. This is a table that shows those various funds that we talked about and how they're laid out. It gives a listing of their various city departments. And again, I really like this chart because I often get asked about what those different fund types are. And this gives you a quick look at how the various funds fit into those fund types. Down there toward the bottom where the arrow is pointing, I would point out that this is for the first time we are including in the budget document the Center City Tax Increment Finance Fund, because it is starting to generate some significant financial resources. So that is a new page or group of pages in your financial summary for that fund. When council adopts the budget, you re-adopt those financial policies that we're going to talk about here. When you adopt the budget, you appropriate all of the funds that are in that budget. So again, that action of appropriating funds is really the level of control that council has on the city's resources. Only council can appropriate fund balance. But when I say you're appropriating all of those planned resources for the fiscal year when you adopt the budget, understand that what that means is that even though we haven't received the revenues yet, we reasonably project that they will come in during the course of the fiscal year, so council can legally appropriate the funds that are planned to come in over the course of the fiscal year. And even though we haven't actually spent the money yet, you have appropriated the funds to be spent over the course of the fiscal year. Unlike the federal government, the city government cannot deficit spend. So every fund of the city organization has to have at least a positive fund balance projected for that fund. Given various assumptions, we make 5-year forecasts for, if we continue on the trends that we are on right now, where we will be over the next 5 years. And again, that is not given such that we're trying to make a perfect, prediction of where we're going to be 5 years from now, but rather it is a warning, if you will, about if we stay on the course we are on, where we will be, such that you might want to make some course corrections so that we don't get into trouble as we move forward over time. We have presented these policies every year, but one thing that I wanted to highlight right now is those levelized utility rate policies that you adopt when you adopt the budget. The levelized utility rate policy says that utility rates should be set at a level to meet the average net income requirement, capital and operating requirements over a 5-year period without the need for interim adjustments, and to meet all reserve requirements at the end of the 5-year period. Now, here in a few weeks, you're going to have a study session that's going to concentrate on the city's enterprise utility funds. But what I would point out to you right now is that we are in violation of this policy for our water enterprise fund and our water reclamation enterprise fund right now. And so you do need to think about some course corrections going forward. And the utilities managers have done a great job in delaying capital projects and that sort of thing, such that we can have that positive fund balance in the water fund and in the water reclamation fund. But just know that we are not on a prudent course in some of those enterprise funds. The Net Revenue Stabilization Fund is better known as the Rainy Day Fund. It was adopted by an ordinance in 2010 and amended in 2019. It basically states that we must have, by law, a minimum of 3% of general fund operation expenditures held in reserve in the general fund. An additional 1% must be budgeted for in the general fund in an emergency reserve account that council actually appropriates and allocates for that purpose. We hope we don't have to spend it. We haven't spent it so far this fiscal year, for example, but we're just entering tornado season, so who knows what may happen. I'm sorry.
Stop talking.
For this little strip of wood right now.
In addition to that, we must have at least a 4% of general fund expenditures set aside in that separate rainy day fund, and we target a 5% rainy day fund reserve, and it has a maximum of 6%. So taken together, we target for 8 to 10% of general fund expenditures to be held in reserve. There's different strings attached to those reserves, but that's the requirements. And council can't appropriate rainy day fund balance unless there has been a federally declared disaster in Norman and Cleveland County after that emergency reserve 1% has been spent. Council's never had to appropriate rainy day fund balance, and that's a very good thing. But just know that the funds are there, but that those strings are attached to them. Okay, so moving into the various funds that we're going to talk about tonight, the general fund and the special revenue funds. We have an overriding theme this year of sales tax uncertainty. And over the last 12 months or so, we get our sales tax and use tax remittance from the State Tax Commission on the 9th or 10th of every month. It's kind of like opening up a Christmas present for me because we see kind of how the economy is going, with sales tax being a proxy for our local economy. And over the last 12 months, when I have been receiving those wire transfers from the State Tax Commission, I've been like, that can't be right. I've been, I've been very shocked at both the health of our local economy and just kind of the outstanding growth that we have had over the last 12 months coming out of the COVID pandemic. And that's not just held true for Norman, but our peer cities throughout the state have experienced those same things to a lesser extent than Norman. But again, this is a very good thing. Our economy is very strong. All of the underlying indicators are strong, but we have this, it can't go on like this. And we don't know when, we don't know how far down we're going to go from this high, this bubble as I'm going to be calling it. But council has done a really good job as we have been monitoring this information, passing it on to you in the monthly reports, in the monthly finance committee meetings. But we know that something's going to change. And so we're preparing for that, and council's done a really good job of making sure that we haven't added a whole lot of things that are ongoing expenditures to spend down that money. The city of Norman has about 80% of its employees that are unionized. We have 904 total positions. That is up somewhat from where it has ever been. So we're over 900 employees now. One misleading things that residents often have, we get a lot of questions and complaints about people's property taxes being too high. And just understand that portrays a misunderstanding that a lot of residents have, because the city gets very little of the property tax. You see that most of the property tax levies are going to the school district and to the county and to the library and to the Moore Norman Technical Center. The city gets about 10% of the property tax bills for folks in Norman, but about 90% of that is going someplace else. One indication of the health of our local economy is in the single-family construction business, which you see has grown pretty healthily over the last couple of years, both in terms of the number of units that are being built and in the value of the total of those permits that are being built. And that is a very good indicator for the underlying economy. This also contributes to our sales tax, because if homes are getting built, if things are being built, that means that contractors are hiring people. That means that shingles are being bought, lumber is being bought, and all of those things contribute to our sales tax and use tax base. So this is a very good picture of what is happening in our underlying economy. Our total budget on the revenue side for fiscal year 22-23 proposed is $251,829,000. You see that we are projecting that about 35% of that revenue is coming from sales tax. That is up a little bit. Again, because our sales tax revenues have been up, that means that our dependence relatively on sales tax is also up. We have about 6% that is coming from the capital improvement tax. And about 10% is,
Sorry, Councilmember Holman.
Just on the, real quick, on the property tax issue, we're also limited on what we can use that for. I think a lot of folks, that would be an important point for folks to understand too, is
yes, sir.
we pay for police and fire, personnel is all through sales tax, basically.
That's correct. We cannot pay for any operations out of property taxes. We can only use property tax to repay general obligation debt and judgments and claims against the city. So again, that's why our proportion of property tax is so low.
If you sue the city of Norman and you are successful, the judgment
Can
goes
be
on the
placed
property
upon the
tax
property
roll,
tax rolls,
not the
yes, sir.
city's general fund. Right. Good point for everybody to know. Thank you.
And yeah, if you have any questions as I'm going along, feel free to ask them as we're going along. On the expenditure side, we are projecting to spend $245 million in the coming fiscal year. Most of that is going for public safety expenses, public works, and utility enterprise expenses. Those services that are being provided to the public directly. And for capital improvement projects, which you see there is about a 16% piece of the pie. I'm trying to see if I'm able to use a, yeah, okay, pointer here. The general fund is the largest single fund of the city. We're projecting in the coming fiscal year that our general fund will be just over $100 million. Again, that is up somewhat from where it has been in the past. 65% of our general fund revenue comes from sales and use tax. And again, sales and use tax giveth and sales and use tax taketh away. I have always bemoaned our dependence on sales tax because sales tax is such a volatile, changing, variable source of revenue. But it's been giving in the last couple of years, so that means that piece of the pie is even larger than it has usually been. And then you see the smaller sources of revenue in the general fund. And as Councilmember Holman points out, this pie would look different for any operation of general fund in any city, in any state other than Oklahoma. Because Oklahoma is the only state in the United States that property taxes cannot go to municipalities for operations. Yes, sir.
Councilman Berlin?
Just for historical, this is sitting close to 65%. What is it on
Or
the
not-
pie in the past?
Yeah, in the past, it's usually about 58, 59. I've seen it as high as 60, but never 65.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman
Just
Peacock?
real quick on that, do we have a breakdown of how much of that comes from actual retail stores and how much comes from online sales?
We have a breakdown of how much is coming from use tax, which kind of reflects what is online versus what is retail brick and mortar stores. And we'll have a chart about that here in a moment, but it's really broken down between sales and use.
Our annual report does have that broken down between retail, restaurants, and so forth.
Excellent, thank you.
And I am remiss in not introducing our budget manager, Kim Kaufman, who actually has done most of the work to get us to where we are now. And just behind me is Jacob Huckabee, who does most of the work on the capital budget. They deserve all the credit for these documents being prepared for you. Where you see mistakes in the documents, blame them.
There's a plus.
And council, I'll tell you, if you look around the country, Norman does an excellent job in preparing documents like this, user-friendly, complete, transparent, thorough, and really the pictures added add, the color commentary to the play-by-play that most budget documents are designed to share. So these documents, we measure up well against any agency across the country in terms of the quality and the caliber of work that goes into your documents.
They bring it down. They actually bring it down.
Yeah, most of the pictures and charts that we're gonna see here are taken straight out of the budget document. So for the public's information, these graphs are in the document. You can find them there in the overview section. On the expenditure side in the general fund, we're projecting to spend about $90 million. So again, we're projecting to bring in $100 million and spend about $90 million. Very different picture than we have seen in recent years. And again, that's a good thing. And what we do with that surplus, as we're going to talk about, is really important.
It's the first time.
Where we spent, yes, sir.
I think it's the first time since I've been on.
Yeah.
It's been not the other way.
We've usually just tried really hard to break even. You see that where those funds are going is, again, direct services to the public, for police, for public works, for fire. Those are our three largest expenditure areas in the general fund, and those are services that the public enjoys directly. This area chart has been in the budget document for a long time, and it's really something that gets overlooked a lot. But I think it really tells a graphic picture this year, because it is showing the growth in all the overall general fund tax revenues. And you see that it's usually fairly flat, growing a little bit, 2%, 3% a year. But in this year, it's growing rather steeply, rather rapidly. And again, that is reflecting that sales tax growth that we have enjoyed over the last 12 months or so. That has been unprecedented. We've seen 20%, 25% month-over-month growth. In my 30-plus years of doing this in 4 different cities, monitoring this sort of thing, that has never happened before. So I want to make sure that you see that this is unusual. It's usually pretty flat. We're projecting that going forward from this year, it will flatten out again. But over the last year, it has been a fairly steep, positive increase. That's
We did
pictured
have
there.
conversation with several cities in the metro, and we just talked about their philosophy and their forecasting. What were some of their assumptions, and they were coming up with formulas like, well, we're gonna use a 3-year average, or we're gonna use 95% of the last 2 years. And at the end, they all said, we really don't have any idea how to project because we've never been here before. So Mr. Francisco is conservative when it comes to these matters, and we would always rather under-promise and over-deliver when it comes to our revenue picture. We recognize whatever it is that council appropriates, it is anticipated by the community that that's what will be spent. And heaven forbid, we got to come to you in February and say, we're not going to make it and we got to roll some things back. So the goal from our perspective is to be as accurate as possible. We are relying on a lot of institutional knowledge in Mr. Francisco and his staff to give us as good an estimate as anybody. And not to say that your assumptions about what's going to happen in the future are any more or less valid than anybody else's. So if you get a feeling we're missing the target, we'd be happy to share with you why our targets are where they are. But don't think for any reason we've got a better crystal ball than anybody else out there.
All that we can do is monitor it, see what's happening, try to explain why it's happening, and adjust as we move forward. And again, I think council's done a really good job of that, because there's never been an arrow that steep in my 35, 40 years of looking at this stuff. It's really astounding. And I've done some speculating over my monitoring period over the last year and a half. And as Darrell says, talking to my peers in other cities, and we're basically like, I don't know what the hell. Nobody knows why. But as we look back on what has happened, there's several things that we know are contributing to this unprecedented growth.
Councilman
If you-
Holman, did you have something?
No, this was it. The presentation wouldn't open in my, at least our 2 iPads. I'm not sure about everybody's. But yeah, this was what I was going to ask is what are the factors that we know of? Because I've seen a lot of speculation about what it might be, but
Yeah, and the title of the slide is the why, but the question mark is what I want to hone in on, because nobody knows. These are things that we know has contributed to it. There is consumer behavior that economists talk about and that we have studied over the years. There is pent-up demand that we know has been in place when the shelter-in-place orders from the state and localities were lifted in the spring of 2020. We know that there was that pent-up demand. People were just raring to get out again. I couldn't wait to go to a movie. I love to go to movies, and I couldn't wait to go to a movie, and my wife didn't want me to go, but damn it, I was going. So that was a lot of what we were experiencing in the spring and summer of 2020, was just pent-up demand, lifting of the shelters in place orders that the state had put in place, because we were in a pandemic emergency, unprecedented, that never happened before. But once we came out of it, boy, we were ready, okay? So that's what I'm calling the first emergence from COVID in the summer months of 2020. And we saw that big growth factor first starting there. But remember, when you were comparing August of 2020 to August of 2019, you were comparing a kind of a down year, right? So growth was fairly easy to achieve. It was an emergence. Okay, so now we move forward in time to spring, Marchish of 2021, and the vaccines became available, and now people really were able to get out safely. Most of the restrictions had been lifted, and people started to get back to work, and that was an important thing. Another important thing was that the Federal CARES Act stimulus packages were coming into play. And what we were experiencing there was that the federal government, a lot of times the federal government has tried to stimulate the economy by cutting taxes. But in this case, the federal government stimulated the economy by putting money into people's pockets. And when money went into people's pockets in the form of those unemployment benefits or delaying college student loan payments, that sort of thing, people spent the money and went directly into the economy, which meant it went directly into our sales tax receipts. So that was an unprecedented thing that we were observing happening, but the effect of that was astounding. So then the Delta variant happened in the fall of 2020, and people pulled back again. And that was psychologically a bigger barrier than people thought it might be. It was a really quick uptick and a just as quick kind of a downturn, but psychologically people we're never going to get out of this COVID thing. And so we saw a pullback in the growth of our sales tax during that period. It's a really good proxy for what's going on in the economy. People were getting back to work fall and winter of 2021, and that's when we saw, I'm a longtime Wendy's guy, right? And I went to Wendy's, as I would always do, to get my Frosty.
You seem like a frosty.
Chocolate, by the way. And Wendy's was closed. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's only 8 o'clock. And they had a sign on the order deal, closed because no employees. I'm like, what are you talking about? Okay, well, this was happening nationally, where folks were not going back to work after the COVID restrictions were lifted. So what employers had to do was raise wages so that people would come back to work. Well, economists will always tell you that the thing that drives inflation more than anything is wage growth. So as wages were increasing, supply of things is being held constant, but demand is increasing. So basic supply and demand economics will tell you that means that inflation is going to follow. So that's what we are experiencing right now. But as it relates to sales tax, inflation is good. Okay? I have, people often ask me why municipalities chose, if you will, back in the 1970s to fund their operations with sales tax instead of property tax. And I was, in grade school at the time, but I suspect that it was a conscious decision because in the 70s, when that constitutional restriction against municipalities getting property tax for operations was put in place, we were experiencing double-digit annual inflation. And that was a very positive thing for sales tax, and that's what we're experiencing now. Okay? So the big question marks here are about, as we move forward and in time past where we are right now, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We certainly know that we're not going to continue to experience 20% month over month sales tax growth. This bubble can't last. Our budget for fiscal year 23 assumes that we're going to go back to a slow growth from where we are now. But understand that what that means is that if we continue with a 2% growth from historic highs from the bubble, we will continue with some really healthy revenue coming in. Now, historically speaking, 2% growth is a conservative growth assumption. But making this growth assumption from a bubble, if you will, is of concern to me and is of concern to the Finance Committee and the economists in our peer cities and to Darrell. And so what I have done here is a little bit of a kind of a sensitivity analysis, if you will, of what if it doesn't continue? What if we have a major recession coming up over the next year or two and our sales tax growth becomes a sales tax decline? So this is where we are now. And just look at if, and this is what's in your budget document, okay? We are projecting to have a $12.5 million surplus in the general fund after all those reserve requirements are met. That's never happened before. Look at what usually happens. Over the last 5 years, we've had some years where that's actually been negative. We've had, in a good year, that's $3 million of a surplus. But we're talking about a $12 million surplus this year. That's never happened before.
But I assume we'll need it for the water rate increase failure,
Well,
even though there are different
by
funds.
policy, yeah, it's a different fund. By policy, the council has usually not subsidized the water enterprise fund out of the general fund because, again, the general fund is providing services that are supported by tax revenue. And that these are services that are provided to everybody, like police, like parks, and these are services that can't be denied to anybody. Anybody can come to a park in Norman. Everybody enjoys police protection in Norman, that sort of thing. The water enterprise, though, is funded by the users of that enterprise through their rates. And if you think about it, that's for a really good reason. Because we have about 15,000 residents of Norman who don't get their water from the city. So why should they pay for the water services with their general fund taxes? They shouldn't. At least that has been the policy of the city. And that is the policy of most cities that have enterprise fund accounting for that very good reason.
But they get to vote.
I made my quiet comment
Yeah.
over here too, so.
So what if it doesn't continue? This is a projection based on, instead of 2% growth in our sales tax, it'll be flat over the next year. And again, we still have healthy fund balances. Notice that the scale has changed down there at the bottom right. Now we're assuming that over the next 5 years, we would grow to have a general fund surplus of $55 million. But but that dwindles. Here is what if, instead of having a 2% growth, we have a 5% decline. Now we would have, over the next fiscal year, about a $20 million surplus in the general fund, still very healthy, but the numbers are dwindling. What if we have a 10% decline? Notice that the scale has now changed to a maximum of about $27 million in the out fifth year. But also notice that now we're talking about, by that fourth year, we're not bringing in more revenue than we're spending anymore. The lines have crossed, okay? Because again, everything else is being held constant here. We're just changing the assumption for sales tax growth and seeing what happens. Expenditure side, everything is the same, but what if, instead of a slow growth, we have a decline? What if we have a 15% decline? Now we're spending more than we're taking in by the third out year. What if we have a 20% decline instead of a 20% growth? And understand that throughout my career, I would have said there's no way that can happen. Norman, sales tax can never, 20% in a given year, it can never happen. But I would have also told you that sales tax could never grow by 20% in a given year. And we are going to be comparing over the next year to where we are now in that bubble. So it's not that far-fetched that we could have a 20% decline from a 20% growth year, which would mean we're kind of back to where we were in 2020.
Councilman
So,
Foreman?
yes.
How does this kind of compare with like the recession that we saw in like 2008? So we had those issues. Did it sink down this low that you're projecting
Not this
here?
low,
Was
no.
it worse?
The worst that I have seen in Norman in my 25 years here was like a 4% decline. And that was catastrophic, okay? Because we didn't have that surplus built up to draw on. The good thing about where we are now, and this is why it is prudent that council is not spending the surplus that we have on ongoing expenses, is that if things turn around, we will at least have those reserves to draw on to maintain our services. If we get back here and we in fact are having a continued growth from this bubble, then what this would indicate is that we should be providing some additional services. And we'll talk about some things that council already knows we need to be doing. We need to be growing. We need to fund those SROs. We need to add the street sweeping crew, those sorts of things we know that we need to do in the stormwater area that we haven't had money to do. But right now, we need to kind of see how it's going and see if we're going to be able to afford those things from within our general fund tax base that we have right now. Here are those assumptions that the general fund is based on. Again, sales tax is projected to grow at 2% from where we are in this bubble year. Use tax is projected to grow at 4%. Franchise fees that are coming in from the private utilities are projected to grow by 3%. That again is tied to their revenues. Fines and forfeitures are projected to grow by 3% from fiscal year 22 levels, but you'll see if you read the city manager's level, our fines and forfeiture revenue is way down. So that is a 3% growth from a very slow year. Our license and permit revenue is projected to grow by 1%. That's that single family permitting slide that you saw a moment ago. The water and reclamation utilities transfer 5% of their revenue to the general fund to mirror what the private utilities pay for the public's right-of-way. The room tax fund pays for administrative services that are provided to them by the general fund. And then there are cost allocation charges for the services that are being provided to the various grants and utility services of the city from the general fund operations like the legal department, city manager's department, and those things. On the expenditure side, we budget for the full cost of our budgeted employees with the assumption that those employees who are qualifying for a merit increase or a longevity increase will receive it. So we budget for those things. We do not budget for a cost of living adjustment, a raise in fiscal year '23. And I would point out again that these budget assumptions operate separately from what actually may happen when the collective bargaining agreements are settled and those sorts of things are built in. But for the budget assumption, we don't assume any cost of living adjustments.
Council, we've had conversations in years past about, well, how do we know what we can do? And this is kind of where the art and the science of budget development and labor negotiations meet. And we describe it as we're kind of building a bridge from both sides of the river at the same time, and our goal is to meet somewhere in the middle. And we just kind of get an overall feeling about where we can go and where we should go in terms of, impacts to our employees based on consumer price index changes, based on increased costs that we know we will experience on our side. Like for healthcare, we pay, the large portion of medical insurance premiums, and our employees pay a smaller portion. But when our rates go up, they go up for everybody. We also look at our ability to remain competitive in the marketplace. We enjoy hiring and retaining the best and brightest employees available to us anywhere in central Oklahoma, and have been very successful bringing in employees from other parts of the country based on the quality of life here in Norman. So there's a lot of variables that go into how we get to where we get, but we know that staying competitive is important, so we're also very market sensitive about what our neighboring agencies are doing as they're meeting and conferring with their bargaining units as well.
And that's one thing Dale is talking about, is this employee turnover savings. We make an assumption about the net impact of retirements during the course of the year, people being hired in at a lower salary and then the person they replace, that sort of thing. On a net average, we have about an $800,000 a year savings that we make a projection in the budget that will continue. We've had a lot of discussions about the subsidy to the public transit and to the public safety sales tax funds to maintain their operations when the sales tax revenue in those dedicated sales taxes is short of the expenditures to provide those services. But again, the sales tax bubble is positively impacting on those earmarked sales taxes as well. So at least for now, we're projecting that we won't have to provide a subsidy to the public safety or the public transit sales tax. And again, that further benefits the general fund balance.
Just a note on that $800,000 in turnover savings. Not every budget will show you what that is, but every employer has turnover. And as Anthony described, based on our historical trends, that's a number we're relatively confident we will experience in savings. If your finance director is not willing to show you what that number is, sometimes it's intentional, sometimes they just don't recognize it's a resource available to the council, and it becomes, dollars available for you to program as you see fit. We believe it is absolutely more transparent to show you what we know is most likely to happen. If you're not seeing that in other budget documents, what that provides is the people who make revenue estimates a little bit of wiggle room. In case I miss, I know I can cover myself. What you see when they put that number up on the front of the document is confidence that we're giving you our best estimates everywhere around, because we know monthly we're going to meet with the finance committee and share all the reports with the council, that if something's off, we're not going to hide it from you. We're going to tell you as soon as we recognize we think something's off, and we're going to have to take corrective action. And I really appreciate that in Mr. Francisco's presentation.
Councilmember Holman?
So on the public transit part, so our overall system costs around $5.5 million. We're half of that, or more is paid for by federal funding.
Yes, sir.
The other half is through the sales tax.
Yes.
But we have been subsidizing from the general fund about 700,000.
In the last year, yes.
And you're saying this coming year, we're projecting that it's not going to need
If
that.
the
this
sales
year.
taxes hold up at where they have been, yes.
And 700,000, that's close to what historically the city's funded, even when it was CART. Our
Yes, sir.
contribution was around
It was about
500 to
900,000, yeah.
900. So we haven't really had to increase our spending on the transit
From
system.
the general fund,
Right.
that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
A few things just for your attention that have happened, changes from our employees' areas. During this fiscal year, the city manager made some changes. The sustainability coordinator position was actually filled and moved to the water reclamation fund. I received badly needed additional municipal accountant. We received some administrative help in the Human Resources Department and the Fire Department. There were some contracted positions in the Public Transit Fund that we basically contracted out for, so those positions were removed from the city's budget. We added a capital project engineer to the capital fund, and we deleted the outreach housing coordinator in the CDBG fund. For fiscal year '23, very few personnel changes are being proposed, but we do propose to restore the 9 police officer positions that were deleted 2 fiscal years ago.
Councilmember Studley and then Councilmember Foreman.
Why are we deleting the internal auditor and audit technician?
Council will recall that the desire was for the internal auditor function to report directly to council. And in order to do that, there would have to be a charter change because those positions, the only position by charter that reports directly to the council is the city manager position. As we have moved along in the process of the charter review, it is not recommended that those positions be added to the council's purview. They have been in the budget for the last 2 fiscal years, awaiting that change that is not proposed to happen. So we have proposed to delete those 2 positions
What do you
from the
mean
budget.
has not proposed to happen? I'm
So as we
confused
were
now.
working our way through the charter review committee, they came up with a list of recommendations. They went, did they go to oversight? Which committee, which council committee did those come
Came
through?
to the full council.
Full
The council
council.
actually voted on each recommendation separately, and they did not vote to advance that one to the voters.
So Mrs. Walker is finalizing ballot language for August that will include 9 questions for the voters to consider amending the charter, and council did not include the question to add the internal auditor position. So that's why it's not there.
So, yeah, why wouldn't we have it just to go directly to you and you direct the report to us then?
That wasn't the instructions we received, but we're happy to have that conversation with council.
Because I
So-
know what the intent was behind that audit, and so I don't think the intent has changed.
Typically, well, and maybe it does have a different title. The concept of an internal auditor is almost an independent set of eyeballs that does report directly to the council, just in case, they discovered, if they thought we were doing anything inappropriate, they would have a direct path to the city council. And if I'm not mistaken, was that former council member Castleberry, who happens to be a CPA, that actually had put that concept?
How it actually came forward was part of the shift that was made in fiscal year '21. The total of $860,000 that was removed from the police department budget, part of that was to fund the internal audit program.
Correct.
So now that those 9 positions are being restored, that's part of the proposal, is to offset some of those costs with this savings. The discussion, remember, at the time was that you wanted the council to be able to assign what work the internal auditor would do, and the internal auditor would report directly to council. In cities that I've worked for where they have an internal auditor, that's certainly the case. Because understand that one of the major areas that an internal auditor might want to examine is the operations of the city manager. And so if that operation is reporting to the city manager, and the city manager has the ability to say, no, you're not gonna do that, it really cripples that particular assignment. If the internal auditor wants to look at the finance director or the operations of the finance department who reports to the city manager, it cripples their ability to do their independent look at things that are happening internally if they don't have that internal report directly to the city council. That's the concept.
I think where, I guess my confusion comes in then is because I know that we had that presentation, I get it, but I guess I wasn't connecting that that presentation had to do with that pull from the budget in 2021, because it was my understanding that due to pending litigation, that we couldn't even talk or touch that 865. So it's just odd to me that now it's like, nope, now that you guys couldn't do anything with it, we're gonna put it back.
No, that's,
So-
Well, litigation happened.
you have
and then-
appropriated money for those two positions the last 2 fiscal years.
Yeah, you've actually
And
got,
you've appropriated some money for the neighborhood alliance. and-
But-
you've got
but it
about
was still for
$1.3
that.
million.
When we revoted, we
Yeah.
revoted to have it go for
Yes.
that, and
So-
that was recently.
Yeah, you still have $1,300,000+ that council has previously appropriated for community outreach, neighborhood alliance, the van program, all those things, all those dollars are
500,000
yours.
was from last year, and
Plus
the year before that was the 865.
So that's all still at your disposal. Typically, when we talk internal auditor, we're all aware of the phrase certified public accountant, a CPA. They're also certified internal auditors. And if that were the position, we would recommend council add the question to the charter amendment, and the qualifications we would look for when we hired that position would be to look for somebody who did hold that certified internal auditor stamp.
Well, I just want to go on record saying that I think this is a sneaky way to give the money back. And we
Well,
had all these meetings, public outcry, and I just think that this is a very sneaky and backdoor way to do this.
I would say it's not, we're trying not to be sneaky, we're putting it right up here on the board in front of everyone. We also had a study session specifically on this topic, at which time we recommended to the council, based on the dollars that we had set aside and the programs that came out of all of that effort, including a new community outreach division in the police department, which is where those 9 positions would go. Those positions will report directly to Captain Stacy Clement and address the issues of homelessness and work.
But we currently have 11 positions that aren't even filled, and then we're going to add 9 more. So then we'll have 20 positions that aren't filled.
Well, we go through a recruitment process, and then we run an academy. We currently have 5 in an academy, and we currently have about 55 applications pending our next academy. So our goal is to fill
Oh, so there's
all
no
those
longer
positions.
the lack of applicants, because I know that was a concern too.
It has been. I don't think we've had 55 applicants in quite a while. So,
Councilman Foreman.
Okay, let me get my hand. Okay, I was not a part of the June 2020 budget vote or whatever, but I do like the idea of having an internal auditor. And if it's not going to be under council, I would prefer to have that, because last year when we had the budget proposed to us, the night we voted, it was like, oops, there's $1 million extra going to the fire department. Not that I don't want y'all to have money, but I think an auditor would have caught that, and we wouldn't have had to do that on the dais, and then that created so much backlash and stuff. So I don't know how or when, if it's now or just in general, but I would like to see an auditor, certified auditor in the city. I know Oklahoma City has one. I think we're getting big. I wouldn't be opposed to that. So if it's not going to be in the charter, I think it's something we should at least consider. However,
We
fund
can
it.
still ask them, we can override the charter review committee if we want to, when she presents these, to add that back in. We can do that.
Okay.
Because I do think it would be most effective coming to us.
To us directly, right?
So.
That would
I
be the
mean,
preference.
That's something we'll have to consider, because I know I already have suggested changes to what we'd already talked about. So that'll be a fun
Okay,
meeting.
thank you.
so in May, that will be back before council, item by item.
Councilman Holman.
Yeah, it was definitely the intent, I believe, of the council at that time for that position to be under the city council, or answer to the city council, to be a real independent auditor, to audit all city departments, the entire city budget.
Yes.
Because, I mean, I trust Anthony a lot, but his department does answer to the city manager, and just like he said, we may have a city manager in the future that says, no, I'm not gonna let you audit any of our departments, or, so the council at that time thought it would be a good idea to have that. And the budget was a little bit tighter then as well. So I know I still do support the idea of that position, knowing that it does require a vote of the people to create, as far as it being independent and answering to the city council. But I do see staff's position of, it's been 2 years and we haven't moved forward with that proposal. Maybe we'll decide to, but we haven't, and it's just been kind of sitting there, so we do need to either move it or make a decision.
Just for council's comfort, if council said tonight, put the internal audit function back in, that's fine. None of the other recommendations change. We have plenty of room to make that
was gonna say,
modification happen.
Do you need us to delete the internal auditor? Maybe we don't need the technician part yet. Maybe we just focus on getting the one position created. But do you need us to delete those in order to
sir.
fund those other three? The 9 police and
Do
the
not.
IT? Okay.
We can add that back in tonight. We can add that back in after study session on the ballot language. That is not the make or break deal point on establishing the community outreach division under Captain Clements. They're not dependent upon one
Well, I
another.
do support the position, the change, proposed change, adding those positions, but I would like to keep that one until we make a, I guess, final decision on whether we want to send it forward or not. And
Can do.
And technically, just for semantics, it wouldn't be, if it's going to the new division, it wouldn't be restore 9 positions, it'd be add.
It would be add to the new divisions. It gets us back to our previous total body count of sworn. Sorry.
Councilman Berlin?
On the auditor, do we have like a clearly defined roles and responsibility that would be? And what they're actually capable of, and
There are positions that we would model this after. Since it would be a position that would report to the city council, we'd bring you back that job description for your final consideration, and it would be a position that potentially you would interview applicants to fill. So they would be a direct report to the city council. So we'll give you the starting grounds. You'd be able to tweak and adjust that the job description any way you saw fit. And then we would arrange for, interviews. We'd fly the position and bring you back a list of good qualified applicants for your consideration.
Councilman Peacock?
And building on that, would council be the one to ultimately make the hire?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Councilman Foreman?
Would the 235, was that internal auditor and audit technician? So we would want to modify the dollar amount if we're just doing the one?
Yeah, and potentially just based on timing, you would want your internal auditor to come on council hire. We're working on the remodel of the central library, make sure we got office space for them, next to the appropriate resources. And then they would, make the hire of whoever that technician was that would support their efforts. So
Okay.
yeah, they wouldn't come on board simultaneously. So yeah, we could definitely put the auditor salary and benefits package back in and then hold off on the audit technician piece and then bring you recommendations on that through your internal auditor at the appropriate time.
Councilmember Hall?
What is the timeline on the ballot language? I mean, when would we have to?
I think you said
May.
May.
Yes,
First
reading in May, the first meeting in May, I believe, maybe the second.
No,
First meeting.
Second reading in May would be the final reading.
Coming right up.
And
Yeah.
August election.
Catherine's currently working on it. What I was saying to Daryl is, it would be better to come back before council in a study session or conference or something before it gets on first reading and make any modifications you desire instead of amending it on the floor. It gets really messy.
Yeah, I assumed it was a study session before to look at the final
Yeah,
changes.
we'll bring you that
but
as a
okay, let's do
pre-council
that.
conference or study session, wherever it fits best.
All right, Mr. Francisco?
Excellent.
And I would point out that, we will prepare amendment languages for this or anything else that council wants to have done. The language here will be to appropriate funds for an internal audit function. Council does not budget positions. That's not in your purview. unless the charter changes for this particular one. But you would appropriate funds of $80,000 or whatever it is for an internal auditor function. So as we talked about a moment ago, we already know some things that we need to be adding employees in these areas. We know that we are in violation of our stormwater permit for one reason, that we need to have this additional maintenance crew to clean out the creeks. We know that we need this additional street sweeper crew. We know that we need to fully fund the school resource officer position in concert with the Norman Public School District. These are areas that are known needs, that we have not had the resources to do them. We'll monitor things, and hopefully we might be able to address some of those things in the coming year.
Councilman Peacock?
Do we have an estimated dollar amount of what all three of these things represent?
They come from different sources, potentially. One of the things, we just kind of came up with a new idea. We want to work through the legalities of how we might go about funding additional stormwater efforts, and maybe a different concept than establishing a separate enterprise fund, but the expansion of an existing enterprise fund potentially. PSST would come from the PSST, Public Safety Sales Tax Fund, and the way it's written describes, when those resources become available. We think that'll be contingent upon the final debt service payment. We issued bonds initially to install a $15 million communication system. That debt service last payment will go out in fiscal year 2027, I believe. When that debt service is paid off, it'll free up annual ongoing resources that you could fully implement the balance of the items spelled out in that language. So the last real big ticket ongoing item, the cost of building a new fire station, we can probably get that done for you about $4.5 million. It's the 15 bodies to man it that is the big challenge. Sure. So as resources become available, and we think that big debt service payment, once that's fully matured, it'll free up some options for council.
Councilmember Hall?
Just a point of clarification on the school resource officers. We currently have an MOU in place with the Norman Public Schools, correct?
Correct.
And I believe that they're responsible for funding half of those SRO positions.
Yeah, I believe the language said there will be shared
Okay.
expenses. I don't think it says half, it says shared.
Has it been traditionally half?
It has been traditionally half.
And so are we anticipating any changes to that agreement?
If there were changes to that agreement, city council would make them.
Okay. So in order to fund the school resource officers, we have to have our partner, the Norman Public Schools, as also willing to contribute.
If that is council's desire, that's exactly what would
Well,
have to
that's
happen.
really what's in our NMOU right now, right?
Yep.
Okay, just checking.
Councilmember Studley?
I was gonna ask, kind of along those questions, has Norman Public Schools paid their half?
For this fiscal year, our
This and just the last few, yeah.
Yes, sir, yeah. Historically, they have, yes. The question has always been half of what? But we've had to come to agreements each year about how much overtime they're gonna cover. Are they gonna cover the cost of fuel or cars and replacements, that sort of thing? But yes, it has always been 50-50. It's just half of what?
Councilmember Pullman?
Yeah, I would view us as we'll be paying for 2 of those 4, and that they would be whatever the cost of providing those 4, that they would be covering half of that, we would be covering half of that going forward. And I do support us going forward with it whenever MPS is ready. The fire department, though, just to clarify, all the current 9 department stations are fully staffed? Or?
Correct.
Okay.
And we've had conversation in the past about what would provide the biggest benefit to the community first, either the relocation and reconstruction of the existing Station 5 or the creation of the new Station 10. Obviously, Station 5 is fully staffed, so in the not too distant future, we can bring you a capital plan to cover the cost of the new Station 5. That may free up some real estate, some existing buildings in Little Axe to do other fun community things with. Get us a little closer to Highway 9, closer to where a little heavier traffic exists. If I'm not mistaken, Station 10 is to be located southwest. It'd be in Ward 7, next to the big housing development.
Ward
Dustin's
5, I
land, yeah.
think. But,
Oh, southeast, yeah.
yeah, in Ward 5. But and I think like we've talked about before, should have some land for us free
In
of
the
charge.
plat?
Yes, free of charge. I would say my opinion about that Fire Station 5 is that unless the fire department strongly recommends otherwise when it comes to Fire Station 10, I would prefer that we do Fire Station 5 because it's a voter public safety sales tax project, and I feel like we have an obligation to do it unless we want to ask voters to change that, or if we don't need to do it anymore or whatever. But I would feel like that might be a priority because it's a voter initiative that's been out there for a few years now, over building Fire Station 10, unless, again, the fire department strongly.
We think it makes the
otherwise.
most sense, and it would also free up some just great community space out there at Little Axe, and I think we would see programs expand
I'd just
into
like
the
to
existing.
check that one off the complete
Yep,
list,
happy to
so-
bring you a plan for that in the not too distant future.
Okay, thanks.
So again, returning from the general fund to the public safety sales tax and other special revenue funds now, but it kind of touches on some things that Darrell was just talking about. First, we know that those personnel additions are behind schedule in the public safety sales tax fund, but the public safety sales tax ordinance that the voters approved anticipated several critical capital needs to be done. The first and major of those was the new communication system, the radio system that has been completed. Fire apparatus, which is an ongoing replacement program. The reconstruction of Fire Station number 5 and moving it into more of a populated area. These are all things that the voters approved. So when those critical capital needs are completed, and this was all in the plans that the voters approved, 3/8% of that 0.5% approved public safety sales tax will go into the general fund, and the public safety sales tax expanded operations will fold into the general fund. Where we have had a subsidy to the separate public safety sales tax fund, those costs will just be absorbed in the general fund. And 1/8% of the 0.5% public safety sales tax will go to the capital fund to continue with the replacement of vehicles in the fire department and the police department and those emergency needs. But we have known that historically that 1/2%, 3/8 here, 1/8 there, has not been enough to provide for the operations. So do not think that when the 2027 debt service has been paid off, that there's freed up funds. There is not. It just becomes a part of the general fund and the capital fund to be paid for out of those funds to continue those expanded services that we have provided, that the voters approved.
Councilmember Foreman.
So 2 questions. Other than Fire Station 5, is there any other capital project under this that has not been started?
No, that is the last of the
That's the
critical
last one.
capital needs.
Okay, and then because we do have to subsidize every year from the general fund because it's negative, what are we looking at? What are we thinking this year is going to end?
Well, that's the, you remember that about four fiscal years ago, when it became apparent that the public safety sales tax fund was not adequate to provide for the expanded services that were demanded by the voters, we actually proposed in the city manager's proposed budget to put it into the capital fund and the general fund then. It was by council amendment that we started this subsidy to make up the difference and identify it plainly as coming from the general fund to the separated public safety sales tax fund. So that's what will happen in the future. is that those expenses will be absorbed in the general fund, just like all the other police and fire department expenses are now. It'll just be that there's this revenue source into the general fund to partially offset those costs.
But as of right now, what is it? Wasn't it like 1.4
Last year,
or
yes,
something?
yes, ma'am.
Do you know what it's looking like for this fiscal year?
For this fiscal year, because the sales taxes are growing in public safety as well, we don't think there'll need to be a subsidy.
Okay. So people can hear that.
Yeah.
Spell it out clearly.
First time in a
Councilman
long
Holman.
time.
Yeah, just add on to that point that the council took action to subsidize the PSST fund so that it wouldn't have to make cuts to positions and projects. Is that right?
Yes, sir. The room tax fund is another of the special revenue funds. You know that by ordinance, the voters approved that 4% and now 5% room tax for the purposes of attracting tourism and visitors to Norman, for park development, and for the promotion of the arts and humanities. Those funds were particularly hard hit during the COVID period because folks weren't staying in hotels. We now projecting that we be back around the 2019 level, and we have restored at least to a zero fund balance in the room tax fund. We have paid off, or will, in about 4 weeks, pay off the outstanding Westwood Golf Course bonds, and we have issued a new room tax backed bond for the Young Family Athletic Center.
Councilman Peacock.
How much is freed up from the Westwood Golf Course bonds? Approximately.
Approximately $280,000 per year.
Okay.
But again, that's now going to debt service on the new debt.
Sure.
So there's several other special revenue funds we won't go into much in this meeting, but again, as you're reviewing the documents, be sure to read what's going on in those special revenue funds. Council did hear the Community Development Block Grant Fund public hearing at your last meeting last week. That will be built into the budget as we move forward. There are several outside federal grants that have been new to the city in this fiscal year that are accounted for in large part in the Special Grants Fund. And council has directed how these funds will be spent in various areas. The CARES Act funds that we received about $14.3 million in reimbursements for the city's expenses related to the COVID pandemic. A lot of those things have been at least appropriated and allocated by the council. The largest of them being the Senior Wellness Center project that is under construction, and those funds are in place. And the construction is ready to start very soon as we can close on the land purchase or the land swap. The American Rescue Plan Act funds, we are expecting our second tranche of funding here in about 2 or 3 weeks to total $22.5 million. Council has given direction about where you want those funds to go. About $10 million has already been appropriated, and you see the areas that council has directed for the remainder of those funds to go to. The state of Oklahoma has also made available some of their ARPA funds to municipalities. They have about a total of $1.8 billion for all of the municipalities in Oklahoma. We have applied for some of those funds. We know that most of the funding that we have applied for is qualified, but we hope that we will be successful in getting approval for some of those funds that we have applied for.
My understanding is they're gonna take a very long time to hand out that money. So if we move forward on one of these projects, because, we kind of have to, do they have some sort of policy where we can be reimbursed for that, do you know?
The guidelines kind of restrict that. You really can't do that.
Okay.
Just things we hear, and nothing in writing, but what we've been told is sometime in July, they will start to award. Now, that may not mean distribute dollars, but it may mean send out a letter saying, hey, your application was successful, please stand by. So we're hopeful we'll at least learn this summer if we should advance some of our efforts with other resources, or maybe it's worth holding back on a couple and waiting for that final notification.
Okay. Councilmember Hall?
Yeah, I was going to just say that that's one of the things that we have mentioned publicly, that we have multiple projects, but one in particular that we discussed recently, that we are expecting some kind of clarification or some kind of notice in July. Now, how we move on from that remains to be seen. And can we also just clarify that the final decision-making lies with the governor? Is that correct?
Yes, there's a committee headed by the governor, but we believe that the governor will make those final decisions.
Okay. And then we have a question mark by the 718 North Porter remediation that we're not.
We might be able to undo the question mark tonight. Council has authorized staff to enter into a purchase and sales agreement for that piece of property to become part of the county's county health clinic. So that's a dollar amount that would be back into the unallocated, unappropriated resources available for council to consider.
So I think, when the time comes, I'm interested in talking about that.
Same. Councilmember Peacock, and then Councilmember Studley, Councilmember Holman.
On the vaccine incentive, did we spend all of that 500,000?
We have not spent all of it. We spent over half of it.
Okay. And do we know what we're going to use the remainder for? Will that be brought back to council for discussion?
It could be. It would be COVID-related expenditures. If we wanted to reprogram it for something totally different, then yes, that would have to come back to council.
Councilmember Studley.
Okay, so just for clarification, you just said that I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right. If we allocate that money, like we had the 9.5 million, I very vividly remember Mr. Pyle here discussing that if we do get some of the state's money, then we could perhaps reallocate that to cover the cost of the 9.5, and then that would free that 9.5 up for us to use for something else.
And-
Are you saying we can't do that now?
If we spend it, yeah, we won't be able to reimburse ourselves. If it's programmed and we haven't spent it and we get notice that the state's gonna give us money for that, we absolutely can. So, Mr. Francisco, please correct
Have
me.
we not started building that? Am I crazy?
We
Did we
have
break ground?
spent design funds.
Okay.
And under the guidelines, when council appropriates the funds, is that under the guidelines, you have obligated it for that purpose. And we would have an argument with the Treasury about if we haven't, you've appropriated it, they say you've obligated it, but we haven't spent it, we'd have an argument about that.
So if we have appropriated it, like we have on those, we really can't take it back without a fight, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Councilmember Holman.
On the 718 North Porter, so, just so I understand correctly, if we sell it, we might have the sale price and what we've been budgeting, 1.8 million.
Correct, and the sales price, 1.2 million, would come to you as general fund discretionary revenue. Council could program that into any general government use. So it doesn't have the same strings attached to it that ARPA dollars have. You could marry that money up with an ARPA project or completely, start something never before discussed.
$3
All
million
discretionary.
potentially.
That we didn't have last year, absolutely.
So I believe
Councilmember Hall?
Sorry. I believe we've already discussed publicly being able to repurpose that into the affordable housing general umbrella for all of the different things that we're considering there. So that, I think we've already talked about, so.
So the big cloud hanging out there is what about the sales tax bubble and what's gonna happen? And again, I've talked to the finance committee about, my own gut feel has been that May would be the turning point of what's going to happen because we'll be a year into the bubble. So I will be very interested in what happens on May the 9th. You know,
We'll all be emailing you.
Yes.
if we're
Big reveal.
up 20% again, you'll hear, you know, I'll step
Screaming from
outside
his
before the
office.
primal
There's
scream.
fireworks at the
That's what we'll be playing.
Yeah, but
Video
again,
might be in order.
we just don't know. I do know that 20% month over month can't continue forever, and we'll see.
Councilman Holman?
In our last finance committee meeting, we did see the dam break or whatever you might want to call it.
Trend buster. Yeah.
We were at 4.5%, down
But then
from
we came
23%. Now all the other cities were also down, and we were still ahead of all of them, but they were at 3 and 4% too. So it's like everybody saw, you know, high
The
teens,
trends are
low
holding
20s,
for
all
all
the way
the
down to
major
4.
cities in Oklahoma. We just,
So I remember you mentioning that it looks like this is the end of it. Probably this is the book.
And then we got another 20. So
And then we got another 20. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
In April, we
I didn't
got
see that one yet.
another
Okay. So yeah. Okay. Well, who knows then?
beware the Ides of May.
that's what they meant.
So as we move forward in the budget process, we will have the first public budget hearing on Tuesday, a week from today. We'll be presenting the capital fund budgets on May the 3rd, the enterprise fund budgets on May the 17th. There'll be a second public budget hearing on May the 24th. And then council will consider the budget for final adoption on June the 14th. And remember that there are state laws that require a budget adoption. So we try to stick to these deadlines as best that we can. That's the end of my presentation. We'll be glad to try to respond to any questions that you have.
All right, any general questions, Councilmember Hall?
Yeah, just a general question on the surplus that we do have in our finance committee meeting in January, I believe.
Mid-year, yes.
We had a preliminary discussion of what we might want to be doing with those surplus funds. So where does that fit into the conversation?
Council showed wonderful fiscal restraint in, I mean, there were lots of recommendations from lots of staff members with ideas about what we could do with one-time money. And council made some very prudent instructions for Mr. Francisco to advance some of those dollars. Do you remember, Anthony, from our initial conversation about that current fiscal year general fund surplus?
Yeah,
what we think that
council
balance
actually
looks like?
appropriated about $700,000 for the vehicle wash facility. You appropriated about $130,000 to bring the rainy day fund to its targeted level.
Andrews Park.
And then there was about $300,000 that was appropriated for accessibility improvements at Andrews Park. There was further discussion about appropriating funds for the finishing of the refurbishment of the municipal complex, but that was not decided on, and you've not considered an appropriation
It was a big,
of that.
So
two big pieces of that, the
It's about
campus
$2.5
remodel.
million for building B, and about $3.5 million for building C is what Brenda, the
So,
project
yeah,
manager,
had
says.
council said, go do that, all those surplus dollars would have been accounted for. And as we kind of work our way through this building and kind of recognize, and actually the mayor brought up the subject, which caused us all to pause. Should we put more money into a functionally obsolete police department, or should we actually start a conversation about what the next police building looks like for the next 50 years? And that, I don't think that subject had hit the table before, at least not recently. But if that winds up being a direction council would like, it always starts with an idea from the city council, putting it on the board as a target for us to work towards, so.
Councilmember Foreman.
Councilmember Foreman would like to make a recommendation for the budget, which is along with that vein. So police funding is a very popular topic in the city of Norman, if you didn't know. And people want to give, people want to take away. It's very divided. I think our geography, and I've talked to you about this, I know that I think we maybe need a second police station. We're so big, some of our vehicles are very antiquated, that sort of thing. So I would like to propose, I don't know when this happens, or you all do your magic, But I would like to allocate $150,000 to a public safety study. If we eventually have to go back to the public for PSST, for a new police building or a new station or vehicles or something like that, or fire or any other public safety, funding for SRO positions. I know people don't even think 13 is enough, that sort of thing. I would prefer that we actually know from a non-biased source that comes in, evaluates our geography, our growing population now that we have up-to-date census information, stuff like that. And I know it's magical. Oh,
May I add a caveat?
The turnpike.
I was getting ready to say the
Holy
OTA,
cow.
they're gonna change our whole public safety approach.
The whole
because-
response.
Yeah.
I know. So
They're gonna pay for everything.
I know.
Wow.
That's why we need Nash. We just need to
Wow.
keep Nash on the OTA. But he's doing great. So I would like to see that. I would like to see a study. We studied everything else. I know I voted against some studies, but this one I think is very, very important. I think it could be very good, non-biased information. Get a full picture of what we need: fire safety, public safety, cops, everything. Lay it out there, figure it out, and then do the appropriate funding and asks from the public that we need.
So, Madam Mayor, a couple of thoughts, and Mr. Francisco, please keep us on track. There would be potentially an option for council to appropriate from current year surplus, or to say, put it in next year's
We could do either.
budget request.
Okay.
So all staff would need is consensus from the council to move in that direction, and we will make it so.
I vote for budget request because I want to add this to the list of things that the OTA is going to pay for, and if we can get that done, then it doesn't need to be in the budget.
So, no.
Councilmember Hall?
Well, that was also my question, that when we talk about, because of the arrival of the turnpike issue, we already have had a council goal the last 2 years for an updated 2040 land use plan. We discussed at a recent meeting that we are also going to need a transportation plan, an updated stormwater plan, and I want to make sure we talk about how we're thinking about doing that too, because I don't believe it's currently in the budget.
It is not in our budget, and our ability to establish a request of items requiring mitigation. We're working kind of on a form and a format. There really isn't one established to say, oh, fill in these blanks and send it to us. So we're kind of in unknown territory as to what that request for mitigation looks like. We're working on a document that'll have all those things identified, potentially a brand new line item in there. And we bring that back to council in a study session to make sure we've got all of those items that we can identify together that need mitigation on that request that we send up to the OTA. So we're happy to add that at council's request.
But I don't want them to be held hostage to the OTA. Like, we need a new, I'm sick of hearing about, 2025 land plan. I don't want to hear it one more time. Like, I'm sick of that. So these are things that we need to do anyway, but I don't want us to wait and see what the OTA is going to do. I think these are things that are imperative to be done now, and I don't want to wait on the OTA. So if we can get consensus now, I'm good with moving forward, but I can wait till budget time if I have to.
Councilmember Schuler?
Yeah, I mean, that was my point. Had I been recognized when I was should have
Talking
been?
out of
Sorry,
turn.
sorry. No, I had, yeah, sorry, that's all right. So my question was I don't currently see any of those plans in the budget. And I know that, to Councilmember Foreman's point about, I don't want any of our things to be held hostage by the OTA, and what happens if they don't pay for it, or they don't agree to pay for it, and it's not currently appropriated in our budget? Like, how does that put us at a disadvantage
So
moving forward?
we are wonderfully not at a disadvantage based on where Mr. Francisco's revenue projections are and where we anticipate council's appropriated expenditures coming in. You've got room. We can absolutely fund an updated comprehensive plan, a traffic plan, a sewer master plan, water master plan, a stormwater master plan, and even a public safety plan. We have capacity in the budget to accomplish those goals. It's just a matter of, do you put them in the budget and then go ask them for money, or do you not put it in the budget and ask them for money? And if they say no, we just bring you back the appropriations request to add.
So how much money are we looking at total for all of those things?
My guess is we're
Approximately.
upwards, probably over $1 million for comprehensive transportation. Those would be general fund.
Each?
Yes, no, well,
good.
Probably 500,000, Jane, on the comprehensive plan, 250,000 to 500,000 on the comp plan.
500.
And the traffic plan would be general fund, sewer master plan, a water master plan, stormwater be general fund at this point, but sewer and water would come out of the enterprise funds. Public safety would come out of the general fund too. So a couple different funding sources, but we would have the capacity in the budget to account for that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about if that does have to come out, I mean, it's multiple different places, but if we're thinking about projections on sales tax and growth and what that extra surplus is gonna be, and then we start thinking about other things that we can spend that money on, and then that puts us in a precarious position if we need to fund those. We need to keep a target amount
Placeholder.
in our brain for
Yeah.
those really important pieces.
We need it done without a turnpike anyway. So, I mean, let's just add
With or
that,
with-
no turnpike.
The comp plan with or without,
Right.
absolutely.
Has to happen. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Counselor Peacock.
I know this is something that we don't necessarily have a hard budget number for, but it was identified as a council priority in our summer retreat last year, and that's pattern zoning. Do we have any intentions of trying to work that concept into this year's budget?
So working on the pilot project, I think the ability for us to bring council the finished project out of the pilot and then say, council, here's what we believe the budget needs to be for that project to become permanent. Plenty of capacity to, we don't have a number. We could pick a number and stick it in there. It'd be a placeholder, but yeah, we really don't have a budget estimate for what that would be at this point.
I know in that study session that we had, there was a figure thrown out there of $300,000 to basically cover the fully comprehensive services, basically give us the entire package. So that's kind of under the assumptions that I've been working with. But as long as we've gotten the ball rolling in this year's budget, then I think I'm.
And once again, with council consensus and direction, we would absolutely just add that to be included in the final budget document for your consideration. So we want to bring you what it is you anticipate seeing to vote on that June 14th date. So the earlier we know, the better off we
Wanted to
are.
speak just a little bit about the process for amendments going forward. Because again, any financial changes to the city manager's proposed budget the council wants to make can be done. But we would, the process of amending is that you have to make those amendments at that adoption meeting. We want to prepare for them in advance, costing things out, that sort of thing. We will start that process at the Finance Committee meeting on this Thursday, where we have a list of changes that we already know need to be recommended to correct some things and that sort of thing. But any amendments that you would like to have considered, doesn't mean you're gonna approve them, but just let us cost them out and put them on the list. Let Kim or myself know, we'll do the work to get them costed out and on the list for your consideration, starting with the Finance Committee meeting on Thursday.
Councilmember Holman, Councilmember Hall.
Yeah, I do support adding those on there, the Foreman Munson Public Safety Plan. Have to mention it. He has been the one citizen that has mentioned it more than anybody else. And I do think it's a really good idea because I like the idea of building a new police department over remodeling the old one.
Yes.
But I'd like to know what does that mean? What does that mean for the police department? What is it? What is the cost? Is this location the best place to do it? Is there another location that's better? Should we have two or one that's out there? A
Substations.
substation. We do have two technically. The investigation center on West Lindsay is technically a police station, but yeah, the fire station 10, 11, 12, the future of that. And then, yeah, the 2025 plan is, we're halfway through 2022 right now, and
Gonna have to get on that
a lot of
horse.
things have changed since the year 2000 when 2025 was
Little
done.
Well, they've changed since we started working on it a few years ago.
Yeah.
Exactly, and I mean, the stormwater plan is 2009, and it's got, as we've had residents point out, some of the information in that plan is from the 90s, some of the data. So a lot's changed in 25 years. Our transit traffic plan isn't that old, but it'll be 10 years old, and I guess it's 8 years old right now, 2014, 15, so a lot has changed since then too. So I think one of the things with the one-time budget stuff is updating these plans so that we can avoid costly errors or mistakes in our infrastructure planning and projects in the future, and so we don't spend $4 million on a remodel of the police station if if it would be more cost effective to spend a little bit more to get a longer building.
You know, and timing is always everything when it comes to municipal budgeting, and this just happens to be a time when, you see a current year surplus and revenues do exceed anticipated expenses in the next fiscal year. The one-time expenses are the absolute most appropriate way to program those dollars. So we can bring you some cost estimates for your consideration. We'll try to put something together just in summary form for Thursday's Finance Committee. Say, here's what it would look like if we put all these pieces in, and
Yeah,
take our next step.
perfect.
Councilman Foreman.
Do you want it in a form of an email by Thursday from us?
Well, Thursday is just the first meeting, but
Well,
you can
right.
send that email at any
But
time.
for other council members, here's our wish list.
Yes.
Okay, Councilman Hall.
I've actually already pursued a number of things that we can definitely talk about, that I've already talked about with Mr. Francisco, but the one that I also want to toss out there, because it also would be another thing that fits into that one-time use thing, is a project that has gone unattended for the last couple years, and that's replacing the Legacy Trail lighting. And, it's in perspective to everything else we're talking about, and where we happen to be with the ability to use various sources of funding for a one-time project. This is a capital project that Mr. O'Leary has tried to include in the budget, and it just hasn't made it. But I feel like we're at the perfect storm of reconsidering that again. It's probably one of the highest things that I hear feedback on from residents all over Norman that use Legacy Trail. So in a nutshell, what has happened is the lighting is 25 years old, and
Probably not LED at that point.
no. And the other thing, apparently, that is way dark history is that when that lighting plan was put in place, we installed it, but OG&E was responsible for maintaining it. But for some reason, they never really approved what they were going to maintain. So that has been a steady issue, but in the last few years, we have a stretch that runs along what I consider one of the highest amenities of Legacy Park, which is all the artwork and sculptures along that trail. It's dark. So it's unsafe. It's an amenity that we're not attending to. And the reason I think it's particularly important this year is because we're in the final design for James Garner 2, and we're talking about improved lighting along Legacy Trail at the northern end. And we're also in design for James Garner 3, which actually the roadway intersects with the Legacy Trail entrance at Duffy. And so as we're attending to all of these other things, it's really the perfect time to think about what we need to do. And it's beyond, like, residents call and they think they just need their globe replaced or they need the light replaced. And it is so much bigger than that. The entire lighting has to be replaced. It cannot be phased, correct? And so it has to be done in one time, and it's a $300,000 price tag. So I don't know if it's an amendment, I don't know exactly where it comes from.
Could come out of current year budget surplus, could be
Yeah.
added to next year's budget, council's preference. We're
Yeah,
happy to
and so,
bring it any way you'd like.
I believe we'll probably be hearing from, interested neighbors that have literally been trying to get some resolution to this and get the lights turned back on, at the public hearing, but just want that out there for your consideration.
I make a suggestion that I'd like to see go forward as we do it with the surplus funds, because it's gonna take time to fix it, and we're about to springtime, summertime. So I would prefer not to wait until June 14th to appropriate it.
We can bring you back that action item ASAP, Mr. O'Leary.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As it was previously stated in council's finance committee meeting, when we talked about the surplus funds, one of the things identified that did have some support but wanted to wait was the remodeling of the complex. Now, understanding that we want to hold up on police to look at other issues, I was hoping to be able to come back to council in May to appropriate the funds to go ahead and finish C. And that would basically finish up the entire complex with the exception of the police department, where we will have had funding to renovate it all, and we could do that simultaneously with municipal court and building A.
How much is that?
About 3.5
3.5.
million.
And you've got about 6 available, Mr. Francisco?
Yes.
All right, Councilmember Hall.
I think Holman was
Oh,
first.
Councilmember Holman.
I was just gonna say, I would support going forward with the other buildings. And think about the police department in the public safety study, whatever it may be.
Councilmember Hall.
And I just wanted to also support, allocating the funds to finish out the building. At the January finance meeting, the robust attendance at the meeting, which was Councilmember Holman and myself. We were really trying to stay in the conservative lane until we had a little bit more information, that we felt more confident about, where we were, and we wanted really input from the full council before we proceeded with that large of an expenditure, but fully in support of that. And that's the only reason that we didn't do it at the time, because
We
we
can-
wanted more input from the rest of the council.
Potentially keep all the contractors mobilized and save on remobilization expenses, et
No, any
cetera.
cries of outrage about this now that we have almost all of us? Seeing none, Councilmember Holman.
Just mention that I would support the remodel of the police department too, if that's what we
I
felt
the
like
study
was.
idea.
Yeah, if that's what, if the police department says this is what we need right now, this is the best path forward is to remodel this building, then I'd be fine with that too. But
Yeah, we
I
think
think it is a good idea to look.
the beauty
Yeah,
of
yeah.
any unappropriated surplus, it lives in fund balance for future action. And perhaps we can highlight some items that we would love that third-party consultant to look at specifically related to public safety, including, let's talk what the next 50 years of building needs to look like, where it needs to be. We think we've got staff recommendations, I think, on where the next 2 or 3 fire stations would go based on growth patterns. Have them look at that. But I think these are great topics to include in that study. And these dollars will just sit on fund balance waiting for council direction. So they don't go away. They just wait for you.
All right, everyone understand the next steps if we have other things that need to be changed, and that even in the hearings, the stuff we've made, we can't actually make the changes until that first meeting, okay. Okay, all right, this meeting is adjourned.
No, I was
I think that's,
It'll be quicker.
Sorry.
Bars and something?
Yeah, it'll be bars and
Bars
restaurants.
and something.
Restaurants?
Somebody about Sister City stuff.
Catch me. When are you back after?
Oh, I'm back now.
Oh, good, okay. So you're not heading back or anything. What? Hey, don't leave. This is gonna be fun too.
Are we taking a break?
Do we want a break? Or we wanna
I
power
got the
through?
key.
Matt left.
Take 5.
All right, we're taking a break then.
We'll reload the presentation and be right
5
back. This one
minutes.
won't take that long. We just want everybody to understand the difference between bar and restaurant as it relates to the municipal code.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brenda, you said Fridays when those books are dropped?
Yeah, well, I was gonna ask Cam, she already left. So, it's not unusual sometimes that somebody takes them, but they typically get put on your porch.
Let me tell you, I
It's not raining. It's windy, but not raining.
It was raining when I got here.
It was raining.
I had a 6-year-old baseball game last night.
What's that? They're okay.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Away from me.
We
I
weren't.
wasn't.
There's a
Ready?
Yes.
Mayor didn't want to.
majority or whatever.
Okay, tonight we wanted to just give a brief overview of the licensure and zoning requirements for bars and restaurants. This will be a very general overview of the subject, and as written, it's not to discuss any one particular application that may come before council or not. So just wanted to
No names.
understood,
No
thoroughly
names.
understand what we're doing here this evening. So to start with, there's a 35% threshold on food sales for a restaurant. And this became effective when the liquor laws changed in October of 2018. That's when it became legal for grocery stores and package stores to sell wine. There were a lot of changes in state law at that time, kind of coming online with those. And so that 35, it went from 50%, excuse me, let me back up. It was 50%, and it went to 35% with the change in state law. So as a result, Norman changed its zoning ordinance as well to reflect the 35%, which mirrored state law and eliminated the low point beer.
Councilmember Hall.
I have one question right here, and this came up at the planning commission. So when, and I know this isn't the threshold anymore, but when the 50% was the threshold, that counted 3.2 beer as food, correct?
And that's what I was just getting
Okay.
ready to mention.
Sorry.
Low point beer was referred to as non-intoxicating beverage
gotta
when
work
it was
harder.
3.2. So it was always calculated in with food sales. And as a result of the law change, everything is now regulated by ABLE. And it's beer or alcohol is alcohol regardless of the percentage of content. And so because of that, they reduced that percentage to 35%. But that all became effective in October of 2018.
Okay, thank you.
And this is if you're considered a restaurant.
Restaurant, yes. You have to have at least that much percentage of food sales. A little bit of a difference between state law and our ordinance. The 35% for the ABLE Commission's calculation purposes can be anything other than the sale of alcohol. So they also include, say if you sell T-shirts or you have other things there, that can go into the 35%. It doesn't just have to be food. Theirs is that 35% has to come from something other than the sale of alcohol. But our zoning ordinance, when changed here in Norman, specifically states food. That 35% has to be from food sales. It excludes alcoholic beverages or any other secondary sources of income. Is like cover charge, things of that nature. So a bar, as defined in our zoning ordinance, is an establishment whose primary activity, measured by dollar volume of sales, involves the sale of on-premise consumption of intoxicating or non-intoxicating beer, mixed beverage, wine, other liquor, so on and so forth. And then the restaurant, as stated, has to have 35% sale of food. Sorry, I kind of said that all backwards, but the significance in state licensure for purposes of catering licenses, a caterer may also have is identified as a person whose purpose is to deliver or distribute alcoholic beverages as an incidental piece of their sales. So incidental to the sale of the distribution of food. So the 35% mechanism, you get to count both the food from your in-house sales as well as any food sales from the catering piece of it. That all gets to come together and you turn in your reports, and that's how they calculate your 35%. But a catering license cannot be issued to any establishment whose main purpose is for the sale of alcohol. So a bar, for instance, cannot carry a caterer's license. And you have to have a caterer's license. Where this comes into play in Norman a little bit is for our special events, whether they're game day or music festival or anything outside, you have to have a caterer's license to be able to participate in those events if you're within the footprint. Otherwise, you cannot sell outside. So if you become a bar, you can no longer hold a caterer's license, so you can no longer participate in any outdoor sales. It's a little bit of a difference there.
Councilmember Hall.
So how common is it, does every restaurant commonly also have a catering license? How does-
Most of them do on Campus Corner as well
Okay.
as downtown. There's a lot throughout Norman, even over on the west side, that still carry their caterer's license. A lot of them do catering. Some don't, they don't necessarily do it on a regular basis, but they carry those licenses. It's an additional $250 for the state license, and so if they ever use it or need to use it, they have it in place to do so. But yes, most of the places on Campus Corner and downtown have them. Most of the restaurants.
So this has come up just recently with the Norman Music Festival, right? With being able to have,
A little bit. There's a little bit of some difference there. Theirs
Okay.
has to do with the public event license. but
okay,
I'm-
so that's a different category?
Yes.
Okay,
And
let's
I'm
not get confused.
Working on that for them, so.
Okay, thank
I
you.
think they'll be okay. Talked about this a little bit, as I talked about that, the differences in the caterer's license, like I said, is incidental to the food sales, and then, kind of went over that. The bar would actually just have a mixed beverage license, not a caterer's license. They would just have a straight up mixed beverage license. And then they would also be posted on the premises 21 to enter. So that's kind of the changes that take place. So as far as our licensing goes and how it ties in with our existing zoning in Norman, we do issue the licenses in the clerk's office. We work with the Able Commission and the applicant through the process. Ours is charged as an occupational tax, not an actual license, because that's what we're allowed to do under the statute. And so when we issue ours, it'll be a mixed beverage occupational tax permit or a strong wine and beer occupational tax permit. I mean, that's what they're called for our purposes. But our threshold of 35% still has to be met to maintain your designation as a restaurant. And that 35% does have to come from the sale of food. So while that determines whether or not you're a restaurant or a bar. And most of the time, we very rarely ever have anybody come in and say they want to operate a bar and just a bar. I mean, that just rarely ever happens. Or if it does happen that they come to us to ask about that, then we explain to them that, there's not any zoning by right that you can do that. You would have to go through a special use zoning request or a rezoning application in order to just be a bar. And then we send them over to planning department and they go through that process with them. So we do have a few that have that special use zoning in place already, but they have gone through that process to get it in order to be a bar.
Which one are those?
How many do we have?
We have, the deli has special use for a bar. The Crossed Cannons Brewery, I think, has recently gotten their zoning or special use zoning from council. Theirs is a little bit different because they're a brewery but they wanted to have the tap room or their on-premise tasting room, and so that required them to have that because they do not sell food.
So
Councilmember Hall?
they do have a special use permit for a bar? I thought we changed their zoning for, I'm really confused
Industrial
about that
and a
one.
bar,
Yeah,
if I remember correctly. Do you remember, Beth?
For Crossed Cannons?
Yeah.
My understanding was that they asked for two special uses, one for bar lounge tavern to have the tasting room, and then
Okay.
another for the brewery, for manufacturing.
Yeah.
okay.
That was
Okay.
my understanding as well.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure I understand all this.
And I can't think of right off the top of my head if there are others. I know we have several special uses downtown. I shouldn't say several. There have been a few granted in the past few years, most of which are breweries. Some of them were, I don't even think it's open right now, but there was an event center on the corner of Crawford and Main, that southeast corner. that was rezoned for special use for a bar for them to be able to have events. So there are locations that have it, but none by right, I guess is.
So like the Blue Bonnet and Red Brick, do they have special use or were they grandfathered
They were
in?
grandfathered
Okay.
in. We do have a few establishments that have been grandfathered in over time.
Okay.
And they would maintain that until if they close their business for a period of 2 years or more, then they would lose that non-conforming grandfather clause, and then they would have to go through the process to reopen.
I'm sorry.
You're
Can I keep going?
still on.
Okay. So you had mentioned about the differences between the ABLE licensing, I guess, is that the right word? Okay. The ABLE licensing, that they could include, in their 35%, they could include anything that's not alcohol, but that's in conflict with what we do. So how do you, does ours trump the?
Ours trumps for Norman. I mean, we still have, zoning is still something that the statute allows us to, and I probably should let somebody besides myself do this, but under the statute, we're allowed to still establish zoning categories for bars.
Yeah.
And since we have that, that ability to do so, our zoning requirements would still trump whatever state, they could still get their state license, but in order to operate as a bar for the city, they would have to be zoned appropriately. And we do, if you recall with marijuana licenses, there is a certificate of compliance that goes in part of the licensing process through ABLE. And so what that is they do have to get signatures from our planning department so that the zoning is appropriate, our building codes, fire inspections, they all get made on the site, and then our inspectors or staff signs off on that, and then that is remitted to ABLE. And that lets ABLE know that they meet all of our local requirements to be licensed. So, if they're not gonna give them a state license if we say their zoning is not in place or appropriate.
And so, when you grant special use as a bar, then all of the percentages in the food and alcohol or like the T-shirts, the food, whatever, that is just for restaurants. That doesn't apply to a special use for a bar.
No, if you're special use for a bar, none of that matters.
Right. Okay.
You're 21 to enter, and your main purpose is for the sale of alcohol.
And right now, the 21 to enter, that's just part of what the expectation is if you get a special use for a bar, that has to be posted on the entrance?
ABLE, yes, that's a requirement of ABLE. If an establishment changed to a bar, a special use for a bar, they would then post the premise as soon as, as soon as they were told that it changed, then they would come and post the premises. And
So at that point, is the enforcement of that the city or ABLE?
for a bar,
Yeah, if you're posting for 21 and older, and there are complaints or reports that you have underage drinkers, is that, who enforces that?
both can.
Okay.
The city can, certainly we do at the city level, and they do their can't remember what that's called, but their bar checks from time to time. But the ABLE department, their officers, their actual officers, they're cleat certified, they carry guns. They have the ability to enforce that as well, and they do. And they issue citations that are actually processed through district court.
Okay. And then what would be the criteria to have your special use permit revoked because you weren't in compliance with the expectations of your special use to be a bar?
I'll let Beth answer that one.
So you're asking about criteria or the process?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to sort out, because, obviously we've seen a few of these now recently, and we'll probably continue to see some. So if you're granted special use to be a bar, and one of the primary things is that you are basically committing to making sure that your clientele is 21 and over. So what happens if we have somebody calls the action line, or if there are complaints that that bar is not in compliance with that particular requirement.
So in the context of their special use, that's going to be dictated by our zoning ordinance.
Okay.
And so enforcement would flow through that, and special uses can be enforced with citation notices, the same as any other zoning violation. There's also a revocation procedure that's available that requires notice and a hearing by city council. So those are ways. Citations, the ones Ms. Hall was referencing, those wouldn't be through the zoning ordinance. That would be them enforcing the state law as it stands. So that's really all kind of still in the same bucket that it ever was.
And that's able.
Right, unless, something like that were added as a condition of their special use. That's how you could get something like that enforced through zoning as well.
So
Just another mechanism.
we do have an ability to attach conditions to special use permits.
Not just bars or taverns, any special use could come through with special conditions, and those are aimed, special uses themselves are just recognized as more intense uses in certain areas, which is why they have individual review. And so the special conditions can be placed essentially to make that use more in line with the neighborhood, less obtrusive, less obstructive, that's a bad word. Sorry.
We also have, as part of their licensing piece of it, that if you have two or more, if you have 3 violations of any nature that's adjudicated through municipal court, could be grounds for revocation of your license.
Okay.
So what happens is we don't wait till you get 3. I mean, it's pretty uncommon for that to happen anyway, but we can call a license review board with our local license review board, which is myself, city attorney's office, planning department, police department, health department. They sit on the review board.
Okay.
And we do that for any type of issues that we're having with an establishment, whether it's sanitation type issues or just citations, and we can bring them in to discuss ways to correct it and move forward. But ultimately, if the citations continue, I mean, that can be grounds for revocation.
Okay.
We've done that one time.
And then I think this is maybe in a different bucket, but this has also come up. So if you are granted special use as a bar, are there any restrictions as to location when it comes to churches, schools, or parks?
None that are stated specifically within our zoning ordinance, though those are functions of state law.
Okay.
And so in order to get their state license, they're going to have to clear those same thresholds with the state and with the Able Commission.
Okay. So it sounds like there's really 2 levels of review and compliance, I guess. I'm not sure how to say
And
that.
just as Ms. Hall said, they're both going to be necessary. The state might think that they have the status to get the mixed beverage license, yet if they don't get compliant zoning, that would be an issue with their certificate of compliance.
Okay. Thank you. Very clarifying. I appreciate this. I really do.
Okay, Councilman Foreman.
My question was just along the vein of something Councilmember Hall just said. One amongst us here checks IDs at a bar. Is that one of our requirements? I mean, if it's 21 and up, do they have to have someone checking IDs to enter, or is that just, or
I mean,
not?
Able requires, I don't know that they say you have to have somebody at the door checking,
Sure.
but they require that everybody that enters be 21. So however they
Are
police
they
that.
required to ask that in the bar for an ID? I mean, I guess.
Well, they're supposed to be 21 to get
I
in, so you
know.
gotta ask
Yeah.
somebody.
I know, like, how do they prove it? Like,
There would supposed
I
to
don't
be,
bar
yeah,
hop,
they would-
obviously, so I don't know.
They would be IDing them.
They would
We can
be.
get them for furnishing if they don't.
Okay.
We can write the person for being in there
Sure.
under 21.
Okay. I don't know how they.
Councilmember
think.
Schuler.
So
I drink it.
I think I understood this correctly, but I just want to make sure that I fully understand. It's back to the caterer license eligibility specifically. So if I'm understanding it correctly, if you cannot get a caterer's license if you only sell, so if you are a bar, basically. And without a catering license, you are not able to sell outdoors. So that would be really important for our campus corner area, right? For game day and things like that.
Typically, I mean, most of them would like to be able to do that, yes.
So all of our businesses, restaurants that are selling outside during game day all have catering licenses.
Correct.
Okay. I just think that's a really important distinction on the atmosphere and what happens on game day at Campus Corner.
And if you do have the bar license or special use for a bar, then you no longer will be able to come out. And Able would change they would take their caterer's license and issue them a mixed beverage license. So.
Okay. I just think that's a really important clarification and distinction.
At least in that area.
Yeah, specifically for Campus Corner.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Holman?
I was just gonna say that when the door person isn't there, then the bartender asks for your ID when you go up to the bar. But when it's busy, obviously they don't want the bartenders having to worry about that, so.
And it sounds like being busy, I mean, you guys have live music every night, so it sounds like the establishments that have special use are either breweries, which are in itself inherently unique, or places that are special event places.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Tortorella?
One last question here, because people are so happy. You technically adjourned the meeting earlier today, so are we in violation of the Open Meetings Act, or are we in jeopardy of that, just to clarify that?
I don't think so.
You don't think
We're
so?
not making any decisions.
Ms. Roberts rules.
Good.
No, she undid
Because we
it.
know what this conversation, who this conversation is about, and I don't want us to get sued.
No, she undid it.
Okay, good. I didn't hear that, thank
That's
you.
not a word, but the magic wand. She said, oh, no, back up, we still have another one.
I have one other question.
Councilmember Hall.
Sorry, yeah. So is there any sort of, I gotta figure out how to ask this. So on game day, we have a lot of things in Norman that are unique to game day, and you get to park on lawns and you get to do a lot of other things. So is there any other exception or allowance made specifically for game day in Norman?
There is, and it's not just Norman, this is statewide, there is a change in law that allows any establishment that sells mixed beverage, with the catering license and all, that within 2,000 feet of the property, like for the state property, since the stadium's on state property, can sell wine or beer to go. And they don't have to be just on the corner. 2,000 feet goes pretty far out when you consider Boyd Street is the barrier.
It's half a mile.
So, places like the service station, I think Library Grill can, it encompasses quite a bigger area than you realize. But that's statewide.
And that's to go? Okay. But again, how would that affect, if you don't have the catering license, you still can't do it?
I would need to double check that, honestly. Because it only applies to beer and wine. It doesn't
Okay.
apply to
Like, how did they show
strong
up?
alcohol. It doesn't apply to anything stronger than that, but I would need to double
vendor?
check that, but I do think you have to have one.
Okay.
I did not drink
Okay.
it because Jack is
Thank you.
disgusting.
All right. Well, is that all the questions on this topic? I asked for the presentation because I don't know how many of you were that familiar with these detailed.
Yeah, I'm glad you did.
Type
Thank
things,
you.
so.
Yeah.
Because it's complicated.
Yes.
And that was a great presentation in the history and all that fun stuff, so. All right, well, now.
We're
this meeting is
officially.
adjourned. Yeah, running home.
Thank you.
You're welcome.